came here from India when I was very young. And actually, at that time, I thought I was going to be a doctor. And then I come here and I saw computers for the first time. And I started trying coding in BASIC. And I got really interested in it. And then I started college and signed up to be a computer science major.
That is Bhavana Singh, a solution architect and the founder of 3 Moons Consulting. I'm Josh Birk, a developer evangelist with Salesforce, and here on the Salesforce Developer Podcast, you will hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down with Bhavana and talk about her career and how she's gone from being a developer to an architect. Now, we start this journey with a job with one of the coolest titles ever, being a Payload Commander for NASA.
Yeah, so this was very interesting. So we were in a control center. So the satellite had already been launched and it was an ozone mapping satellite. And basically what we did was we monitored the health and safety of the satellite. So every time the satellite would pass over a control center, like say Canberra, Australia, and there's Wallops in Virginia, any of those places, then we would get a link to the satellite and it would dump data. And then we have to make sure all the voltages and currents and everything is, what we expect it to be. I have a very good story around that time. One time what happened was I was downloading this data and then one current said it was 1 ampere, and which is oh my God, this satellite is going to fry. What's going on? So I download all the data. It's ones and zeros, and there was no tool. Now I'm thinking about it, there were no tools for me to put that somewhere to see what it says. So I printed it in a dot matrix printer, and I would underline 8 bits at a time to figure out what the hexadecimal is. And then I would come up with these codes, and then there was a handbook, and I would go into there and I would figure out what that number was. So somewhere in some software, somebody forgot to divide by something because the actual current was 10 milliamp, which was fine. But I spent 4 or 5 hours. I was working night shift, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I spent a majority of that time just figuring out what those numbers were by hand. So those were the fun days, yes.
Nice. And I have to appreciate the reference to a dot matrix printer. We might have to put a link to that in the show notes so that some of our viewers understand what we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think my kids even know what they are or have ever seen one.
Right. And I completely respect those. Shout out to Pascal. My first real programming experience was in Perl.
Oh, okay.
That ages me slightly, and every now and then I like to ask, poll the room, how many Perl developers we still have in the room, and we're dwindling. We're slowly dwindling. Okay, so, but then you went from NASA because in NASA you weren't working in Java, right?
Yeah, then I moved to a different NASA project and everything over there was C++. When I had my second kid, I took some break and then I was home for 2 years and I was really worried that nobody's going to ever hire me again because I'm going to lose all my skills. And this was 2000. And then I started looking for a job and was hired as a Java developer within a week. And they were like, oh, I spent past 2 years worried, for nothing. So
right.
2000 is when I started actually still working on a NASA project, in Java.
Got it. And as a developer so you're going from Pascal to C++ to Java. I know I've had a lot of experiences where it's just sort of shall we say, on the site training to a new programming language, because that's just what the project works with. What has that been like for you, kind of moving from one language to another or from one framework to another?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's some languages have something that's language specific, but most of the time you are okay, I want to do this. I know how to do this in C++. I guess by the time I had internet, luckily, so let me see how this can be done in Java. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, when I moved to Apex, I was okay, I know how to do this other ways. How can it be done? So then you Google, how do I don't know, even sort a list or something like that. Then you just say, then you just need to understand the syntax.
Yeah. I'm pretty certain without the existence of online forums, I wouldn't be a developer today.
Yeah, that would be very difficult. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah.
The only language I ever learned in an actual classroom was Turtle Graphics with Logo. Everything else was post-college. And in fact, I had an interview at my alma mater where they asked me if I took the web development class with a certain professor. And I'm like, no, I was the guy staying up late with that professor arguing about HTML versus PDF. So that's where we were at the time. Okay, so you mentioned Apex. So how did you go from Java to being introduced to Salesforce?
So NASA had a lot of budget cuts around that time, 2002. So when I lost that job, the second job that I found, it was in a hedge fund. And I was like, okay, I won't even like this. I would just do this for a year and look for something else. And I ended up being there for 13 years. But it got really interesting because I was, instead of command and control center, they had a trading floor, and I was writing, high frequency algorithms in Java for trading markets.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you get the, ask and bid data, and then you make a decision on each tick, and you break up your position into small portions and you buy or sell. So it was like, it got really, so I didn't think that it would be as interesting as, working in NASA, but it was, and I ended up being there a long time. So when I was there, I went through various roles. It's like a typical story. You are a developer, senior developer, then you become like a project manager, software development manager, and then you have a team of developers, and then you all you're doing is meetings and one-on-ones and not writing any code. And then I did that for a while, and then around that time they had an on-prem CRM system that they used for their fund operations, but then they had really tough time reaching out their people in the field. So somebody thought of getting Salesforce as just the tool for sales and marketing department, but did not trust it enough to put their fund operations data because it was in the cloud and they didn't trust the cloud. So now I was working on 2 CRM systems and then trying to get data from one, aggregating it so you cannot tell, and then putting it into the other system. And that was my first exposure to Salesforce in 2012. And the funny thing is, like, just prior to that, I had spent 6 months trying to upgrade the other CRM system, going like from version 4 to version 2. It really took 6 months because there were so many issues. That CRM system said, don't ever directly use SQL to access a database, but we didn't listen to them. We did. And then they changed the whole database and all of our reports were not working. It was a nightmare. So then when I saw Salesforce, and then when I saw that the upgrades just happen like by some magic, like 3 times a year, and you don't even feel anything, I was like, this is too good to be real. This is like, but I was intrigued. I could not believe that could happen, that any software could do that for you. And that's where I sort of fell in love with cloud computing, where not only they give you upgrades like that, but you could just work on it from anywhere, and anything you ever need is there, right there.
Right.
Not on any server. Yeah.
And this thing that haunted you for the last 6 months could never happen again.
Yeah. I would like grab anybody who would want to listen and say, do you believe like this happens on a Saturday or Sunday, like at 2 a.m. for 5 minutes, and then you come in the morning and it's done? Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
So we touched on it a little bit, but how did you find transitioning from Java and then going into Apex?
So yeah, it was actually mostly good because like the syntax is very similar, but the thing that I struggled the most with were now dealing with the limits. Right. Because I was used to, okay, this is a little slow. Let's throw some more cores at it and more memory. And memory used to be an issue maybe in the early 90s, where if you forgot to allocate and then deallocate, then you will run out of memory. I forget the exception, but there was like you would run out of memory exception, something like that, out of memory. But now you don't run out of memory. You just can't do things because you can't have so many records at a time. You can't, have you cannot do select star in a circle. Not that you should do it anywhere. Yeah, you shouldn't have done it even in the old ways because that's just bad practice. But you might have done it once in a while, but you can no longer do that. You have to only get the fields you need, not more, not less, because then you don't want to, so all those things like it makes you maybe a more disciplined developer, but that took a while for me to adjust to. And I was like, what do you mean I can't just declare a variable and then doesn't live forever? Like, what do you mean?
Right.
What is this? Yeah. Context transaction, Yeah. So that was like the biggest adjustment for me.
I feel like that last one is the one we don't talk about a lot. And it's one of the big ones because having come from, a client server background, but also, kind of being in control of my destiny, it's like the first thing I do is set up like the global variables I need. And it is. It's an interesting shift in context.
Yeah, I remember we used to have this database connection class, and then we would have a singleton class, and we would. So when we started this application, and then if we don't reboot the server for like 2 weeks, that thing is living for 2 weeks.
Right. Right.
We have that connection, and now it doesn't.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And so it kind of sounds like you keep running into scenarios. You're commanding satellites, doing software for trading, like very mission critical kind of things. And now you're entering the world of Salesforce, but like, how did this start kind of pushing you into the role of like a technical architect outside of just the developer role itself?
Yeah, it's a very non-glamorous story why I got really interested into technical architects. I think it was Dreamforce, not last, but the one before, where maybe it was like Susan Ferguson. I don't know who it was. Like, I was at a session and they were like, there are only less than 5% women doing, CTA, and it's like really difficult. And I was like, okay, that's enough for me to say I'm going to do it because it's really difficult and there are not enough women doing it. I was like, I'm going to change that. And then the funniest thing is I found myself not to be alone, because I found Ladies Be Architect and my study buddy Allison Park in Chicago, and then I now feel like there's this whole army of women, like just one day there's going to be this big spike because we all like almost there, but not really there. Because we all started probably around that session where they say, they're not enough women. We're like, what? So that's...
You're like, we got this.
Yeah, we have to do this, even if I don't want to. I even tell my husband, once I become a CT, I'll probably retire because I'll be too tired. And it's like very interesting, it's like a two different like frame of mind. So as a developer, sometimes I go so down deep into the weeds and I can't even pull out and see what the big picture was. Right. And I love like being an architect, like, what are you trying to achieve? And it is problem solving on a very different level. So that really intrigues me. And right now I work for myself and I have a couple of small clients. And then sometimes they would say, can you create a field or a flag and on here? And I was like, what are you trying to achieve? I was like, you shouldn't tell me to add a field. You should tell me what you're trying to do and let me figure out if you need a field or maybe there's something else. So yeah, I like that aspect of it. Like, the whole problem solving and looking at the big picture.
And it kind of sounds like life was sort of setting you up for that direction to begin with, because I would imagine you were asking yourself, I agree, as a developer, I love to get in the weeds sometimes. I spend a whole afternoon there. Yeah. But before you get there, you were probably starting to ask yourself some of those questions before, writing software for futures trading. Yeah,
because I've been in projects where like they don't have like a technical architect on the team. So you are everything. You are cleaning the data, you're writing, you're the database, you're the DBA, you're the developer, you're also the architect. So you have to do the complete solution. So you have all the roles. Yeah.
I feel like there's an interesting transition for some developer personalities in the sense that I kind of walked in the same thing of sort of being a proto-architect, but mostly because I didn't want to get trapped writing stuff I didn't need to.
Yeah.
So I would be the person in the room with the client being like, yeah, that's an interesting idea, but maybe we don't. Yeah.
Or like all the question, like when they ask for something, why do you need this? Like, do you really need this?
Right. Right. Yeah. I remember talking to a developer at a random, I think it was a World Tour event or something like that. And he came up to me and he's like, hey, I've got this client and they're asking me how to get this data grid to show 500,000 records at the same time. And my first question was, why?
Why do you want to show that many records? Yeah.
Like you got to challenge this client a little bit more.
Yeah, because I had the similar, because I was working on a lightning data table for somebody and they wanted to see everything at the same time and it paginates. And I was like, are you like visually and physically able to process that many records at a time? Like, what are you going to do with that many records? Like to look at them at the same time. And if you need to look at this, maybe you need a chart or summary of it. There's nobody who can look at a table that's like 500,000 long and really do something with that data.
It actually perform on that, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And to poke into that a little bit, you've had a lot of implementations with different clients. Are there common pitfalls like that you see that are kind of maybe unique to Salesforce itself?
So sometimes people get too set on like their requirements. So they picture something this way and then can Salesforce do that? And I was like, there's always like more than one way of doing it. So, okay, if you find out it cannot be done, then like, how about this solution? How about that solution? Because there's always work around. So I haven't found anything limiting yet because there are always, like workarounds or like if you're hitting limits, you have these future calls or asynchronous calls. So I mean, or you can just like throw money at it, right? Because I had like one client where they were like hitting the API limits. I was like, okay, looks like we just got to buy more API, or maybe do things more efficiently. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you work for yourself, and during that transition, you've talked about the need to invest in yourself. What do you mean by that?
So when I first started working for myself, for the first 3 or 4 months, I didn't even look for any work. I had only the admin certification then. And I was like, I need to have more certification, not because I need just certification to show on my profile, but I need to understand if I'm going to call myself a consultant, then I need to understand at least what the Sales Cloud is. So I worked on the Sales Cloud consultant certification, and that was a really hard one for me because I realized what a narrow sliver of Sales Cloud I have been using. So, and then I got, I forget which one I got next, maybe Platform App Builder or Developer one. But so investing in myself, I was laid off in March, and then there was a Trailhead X coming in. I was like, I need to go there. So I live on East Coast to go to West Coast, the flights, the hotel, everything is expensive. And then the Dreamforce, and then I started going to a lot of community events. So all of these things, even though if you go to an event and you cannot like at the end of it say, okay, this is my ROI on this event, it somehow happens in a roundabout way somehow. So I really tell people. So before that, I used to always rely like on my employer. I was like, oh, I can go to Dreamforce because they won't send me. But then when I became a consultant, I realized you need to invest in yourself. So if they won't send you, they give you a week off. If they give you a week off, do you think it's worth for you to invest that much money in yourself to learn more? And if the answer is yes, just go do it. So I've been investing in myself with like by going to conferences, taking courses, and also investing. Last year, I joined 100 Days of Trailhead, and I would wake up every morning, go downstairs, make a cup of coffee, and sit down for an hour and do a trailhead or learn something. And I continued that even like way past it because it became a habit. Like you just come down, and then the first thing you want to do is like, I want to do something pleasant, and let me just do a trailhead. Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that ROI. First of all, how many certificates do you have right now?
So I have 9 now. I'm like working on identity, which is really difficult for me right now. So I'm working on that to finish the pyramid. So I have to do that. Yeah. So I have 9.
And I should say congratulations because you were the first ever developer Golden Hoodie recipient.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah. That was an amazing experience. Yes. Yes.
What was that like, getting up on stage and being with Parker? And how did you feel?
Very, very scared. And I was so scared. But then right before getting on the stage, I got to spend some time with Parker. And then he's such a nice person. He just put me at ease. And then we talked about, and then I was like, when I got on the stage, I'll just pretend I'm continuing talking to him, and all these people around us are not there because it was really scary. Yeah, but it was like actually such a good experience because after that, so many people came to me and they feel like, oh, if you can do it. And also to see a developer, like a woman developer up there, they were really, really inspired. So just for that, I'm really happy. Parker
does have a calming influence on people. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yes.
So this is an interesting trajectory then, because you went to a session, you saw statistics saying, women were not represented in this particular demographic. You and several others have now said no, like we don't accept that. We're moving forward with that. But then you yourself get to get on stage, and somebody sees you there now as that representation. So putting yourself out there in that community, I guess going back to ROI, your investment in yourself is also has been really good for our community.
Yes. I mean, I run the Women in Tech group here in Maryland, in Columbia, Maryland. And this is why I tell, and I think we have 200 members, but very few come to the actual meeting, but most of them who come to the meeting are not developers. So they all feel like when we talk about CTA, or even just being like not even go all the way up to CTA mountain, just do the solution architect or application architect. They were like, no, we are just an admin. It's not for us. And then just to let them know, there are probably more admins now who are, trying to become a CTA and who are really good architects that than developers. I mean, you need both angles. I feel like I'm not a strong enough admin, so I need to become a stronger admin in order to become a better architect. So yes, I do like always encourage people like, no, I know it's very hard to think about that, but just think about like maybe you just get the data architecture, or maybe that certification and see if it intrigues you some more. And maybe you just become a solution architect or a system architect or application architect. It doesn't have to be CTA. And see once you get there, see what the next step is.
Nice. So you founded the WIT in Columbia?
Yeah, because I had gone to sales, like before Dreamforce, we always have that the night before event for women in tech. And I'm always so inspired by that event. And then I came back one year and I was like, where is the local WIT group? And there was one, it was like on the Trailblazer community, but they didn't meet. And then I would ask them, like, can we please meet? And there was like no response. So I was really frustrated. And then somebody said, like, why don't you start your own? And I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. So I started my own, and my first meeting was 2 people. And we just went to a restaurant and just talked about stuff. And then slowly now, we have like, we try to find speakers. We have good, I even had like Charlie Isaacs promise me that he'll come do some IoT,
Oh, Charlie will come.
He will.
Charlie will come. Charlie Isaacs is one of the very few people that I have traveled. Actually, he's really the only person I have repeatedly traveled to events, and Charlie's just there. He's just there. It's not just Dreamforce. It's like a random, DG group in like, New York City. Like I'm like there. I'm like, oh, hey, that's Charlie.
He's amazing. One time we had this like sort of like a Ohana like get together on a Sunday in DC, and somebody was coming from Canada, and then we were tweeting about it, and then Charlie found out, and then he shows up, and I'm like, wow. I guess the weekends when he happens to be on East Coast. Otherwise, I never know where he is because he's everywhere.
It's a little bit of an extrovert, that one.
Yes.
Now, you're also involved in a group that has been mentioned, and let's feature it a little bit more, and that being Rad Women. How did you get involved in Rad Women?
Oh, yes. So when I was doing my undergrad, one of my professors, I think it was like electronics 100, 200, 300. When I finished the whole series with him, I remember he asked me to promise him that I will teach one day. He said, you'll be really good at it. That's what he thought.
Really?
And that was like, okay. And then, it was forgotten. I finished my degree. I got my first job and I just forgot all about it. Then one day I heard about Rad Women program, and I was like, because I didn't know I could teach. I thought you probably need to go to school to learn how to teach. And I talked to Angela Maholi, and she was like, and so I got started like in the fall of 2017, and I've been doing it since. I just love the program. I just love being involved. I mean, I remember my first time I was so nervous because like, do I know enough to teach these admins how to like Apex 101? But the learners who commit to do this are so curious and they're so interested in learning that I just get so energized by their enthusiasm. And it's such a good program. I just tell everybody and anybody who's a strong admin, who is interested in learning, just go to radwomen.org and sign up for, their next session availability, because also any developers who's interested in teaching, because we're always looking for more coaches. But it is such a good program, and I see it is becoming like a family. All these learners who learn, then they go on to do these great things. It's just amazing.
So let's frame that a little bit. How would you describe the mission statement for Rad Women?
Oh, they probably have a really good one on their website. I could probably not do justice. I have the T-shirt. It says like fixing the gender gap, one line of code at a time, or something like that.
Oh, I like that.
Nice. It's something like that. They have a really cool statement. I have to check my T-shirt to say exactly what it says, but and it's just like such a good mission because. Nice. Because coding sometimes seems so out of reach to some people, but it shouldn't be. I mean, so. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it on the pod before. It's not that it's not a technical skill. It's not that it's not a professional skill, but it's also not black magic.
Yes.
And if there's one thing I've kind of heard consistently is that those two things that you mentioned before, the enthusiasm, the curiosity, that's really all you need.
Yes. And then you have to remember, like, I had never used any JavaScript in my life. And now I have to know it for Lightning Web Components. And I find it hard. Like it's the syntax, I find it hard. And, it doesn't follow the exact, classes and, methods. And that. So I'm struggling with it a little bit. And I was like, now I see like how somebody who's never seen Apex, how everything might look so foreign to them.
Yeah. As a JavaScript developer who turned into more of a Java/.NET developer, I think it's interesting that like a JavaScript person going to a strongly typed language is like, oh, look how orderly this is. And then when you go the other way around, it's like, what the heck are you doing, JavaScript?
I know. You can, it's like, where are the rules? Like, what are you can put anything into anything? What's going on here? It's difficult, but I will get it one of these days.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of people in your position because a lot of, shall we say, I'll use traditional. A lot of the code that's in Salesforce right now is there's still a lot of Visual Force, there's a lot of Apex, and then there's this like thin layer of JavaScript to kind of make those two things work. And now we're moving into a world where, if not Node on a on a Heroku instance or something like that, but you're going Lightning Web Components is pushing more and more of that really kind of modern JavaScript programming.
Yeah, and I know just enough to like Google and write even like the Aura component or the new Lightning Web component. But I need to know it well if I'm going to write efficient code. Yeah, so that's my thing to do.
That's your current goal.
Yeah.
All right, to quickly bring it back to Rad Women really quickly, because one of the things I constantly hear is Rad Women needs more coaches. So who would make a good candidate to be a coach, and how could they sign up?
So, I mean, any developer who's learning, who's, wants to teach, who's curious to, share their knowledge. But also, one thing I really learned is like there's something in it for you too, developers, because I feel like I became more comfortable, public speaking, because it is public speaking, even though it's for like a small group of people. So there's something in it for you. But if you have a passion for learning, because there's always more learners than coaches available. So there's always a waiting list. So anybody who's interested, just go to radwomen.org, and then there's a place there where you say you want to sign up to be a coach. And yes, definitely. The more we can have, the shorter waiting list we have, that would be an amazing thing.
And as kind of a side thing, as we're recording this, our world is in a very unprecedented situation. And, you and I are very used to working from home and having like a flexible work lifestyle. But there's a lot of people who in the last week even have been kind of thrusted into that role of a remote worker. Do you have any like top of mind tips for the person who just got told, you're going to be working from your living room?
Yeah, it does take a lot of discipline, because especially when you're at home in the beginning, it's like, yay, no commute. It's so much fun. But it does take a lot of discipline, because when you're working and you can't just get up and, I don't know, start doing the dishes. You have to say, this is my work. I mean, you can have the flexibilities, but especially people now, I guess, because if they even have kids at home, then it would become very difficult. But you have to say, okay, for the next, maybe you take turns if your spouse is at home too, say this is 4 hours is my because you would need that uninterrupted time of working. And it can also get very lonely. In the beginning, it's a lot of fun, but then it gets very lonely. So I do feel like using, online meeting like Zoom or something with cameras on really helps. I'm part of this Twitter group called Chicago Ohana, even though I'm not in Chicago, but I'm really, really good friends with a lot of my good friends in Chicago. So we did this like a breakfast coffee, Ohana breakfast coffee club or something like that. We called it this Sunday. And then we were on and we probably talked about this virus most of the time, or how to cope with it. But it really helps, because then you don't feel alone, and then make some kind of a disciplined schedule, take turns, allow the flexibility, because you do have the flexibility, right? I could probably never get like 8 hours of straight work, and maybe you don't need to. You can work 4 hours in the morning. I really like getting up early, get the work done, take the middle of the day to do whatever, and then maybe later in the day you have another chunk of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really good advice, because I think there's people who, once they get into the unstructured form of a non-office, shall we say, they kind of think, well, my workday starts at 9 and I have no distractions, so surely I should be able to work for 6 to 8 hours straight. And it's like, no.
You can't. You can't.
Nobody ever does that. Like, you didn't do that in your office life, so you shouldn't expect that in your home office life.
Right. And yeah, I sometimes end up working. So if you need to put in 40 hours, they don't have to be Monday through Friday. Maybe you could work like 5 hours every day in the morning, and and take it easy the rest of the day, because it's going to be a trying time for everybody, including the kids in the house. So yes.
And I think it's interesting that you use the dishes example, because I have found myself at my desk saying, I need to take a break. I'm going to go do the dishes.
Yeah. And that helps, right? I sometimes just say, okay, this is too much. I'm going to get up and water my plants. And I do use my Fitbit to remind me every hour to do 250 steps. So, because otherwise you could just sit there and there's no interruption. There's no phone calls. There's no coworker stopping by. So you could just sit there for 4 hours and not move. Which is not a good thing.
Not a good thing. Not a good thing. Every now and then you have to remember to eat lunch.
Yeah. And go for a little walk, because I think even with the virus, walks are still safe. So do that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. One final question. What is your favorite non-technical hobby?
Ooh, okay. So for the past 5 or 6 years now, I've been trying to learn how to make wine. I'm really into red wine, and I'm not sure if I'm a good winemaker yet, but I'm a really good wine drinker. And so there's a winemaker here in Howard County, and he gets grapes from Napa. And then we go through the whole process. So currently we're making something called LBR, which is a left bank red style red wine. And it's, get the grapes from Stagecoach Vineyard in Napa, get it here, we get grapes, and then we crush them and do all the process. And right now it's in the barrel, and we'll bottle it in September. And then each time I learn a little bit more. So that's what I always say, that when I grow up, I probably going to be a winemaker.
And I want to wish Bhavana well on her wine making journey. That's our show. I want to thank Bhavana for the great conversation, and also just a shout out to all of the women who looked at that statistic about women in technical architecture and said, oh, heck no. Now, if you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see our show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.